Hello, and thank you for joining. This is Michelle Savage. I'm with XBRL US, and you are here for our webinar on inline XBRL for small reporting companies and foreign private issuers. For our session today, I just want to run through a few logistical points. We are offering CPE credit for the program. And for those of you getting CPE credit, please make sure that you respond to the poll questions that we're going to be showing at 2 different points through the program today. Once we get your responses, we'll be able to send you your CPE certification at the end. If you have any problems encountering technical difficulties, please email us at support@xbrl.us, and we'll do our best to get you back online. I think we're going to go straight to slide number 2 now. I'm going to walk you through our agenda for today. We're going to start off with the inline XBRL and cover page tagging requirements, and that's going to be led by Lisa Cousineau. Lisa is Director of XBRL Consulting Services, Professional Standards and Best Practices at Broadridge Financial Solutions. Lisa is a long-standing member of XBRL US, and we're really happy to have her. Lisa is then going to lead a discussion with the SEC, and we're really pleased to have with us today Julie Marlowe. Julie is Assistant Director in the Office of Structured Disclosure, Division of Economics and Risk Analysis at the SEC. And they're going to have an interesting discussion about the inline XBRL tagging requirements and basically SEC observations. We'll then take a couple of those CPE questions that I mentioned, and we will then move on to Stephen Horowitz. Stephen is Manager of Technical Services and Web Applications at NovaWorks. NovaWorks is also a long-standing member of XBRL US and has done a lot of work leading various committees. Steve is going to cover what's changed and what's not changed in the XBRL report. He's also going to talk a little bit about some of the new features of the instance document that small reporting companies and foreign private issuers will need to deal with as they begin to comply. We'll then cover the final CPE questions, and then we'll talk about our session that's going to be held next week that we hope all of you will attend, which is going to be a continuation of the discussion from this week on the fundamentals, and we're also going to be talking about investor use of small reporting company data. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Lisa, and Lisa's going to talk to you about some of the requirements that are ahead. Oh, one last thing I wanted to mention on just logistical points is that if you do have questions for any of our speakers today, just click on the Q&A link on your screen, and you'll be able to key your question in, and we'll take those questions at various points through the presentation. Thanks very much, and I'll turn it over to Lisa.
Thank you, Michelle. So today I wanted to go over some of the requirements for inline XBRL and cover page tagging. As far as the actual rule with inline, depending on your filing status, large accelerated filers started filing with their first fiscal period after June 15th, 2019. So they've been filing now for almost 2 years. Accelerated filers joined the mix with their first fiscal period after June 15th, 2020. And now all other filers, including foreign private issuers will start with their first fiscal period ending on or after June 15th, 2021. So this means for calendar year filers, that would be your second quarter report for 2021. Now, regardless of the phase, all filers comply with the first 10Q submitted after the compliance date. And so for calendar year filers, again, that will be your second quarter filing. There are no changes to the timing of the submission, so you'll still, depending on your filing status, will still file 40 or 45 days from the end of the quarter for a 10Q, and then either 60, 75, or 90 days from the end of the year to file your 10K. The requirement to post XBRL files to the company's website has also been eliminated, so that's no longer required. As far as cover page tagging, a few things here. Registrants are required to tag all cover page information in inline XBRL on forms 10K, 10Q, 8K, 20F, and 40F. The timing for these fast act cover page requirements is the same as inline filing requirements. And you'll be required to comply beginning with your first Form 10Q filed for a fiscal period ending on or after the compliance date. So if your first compliance filing after June 15th is a 10K, it will not need to be an inline filing. You'll actually wait until your first quarter to file that first inline 10Q. And for 20F and 40F filers, you'll also begin with your first required inline filing. Once you've actually submitted that first 10Q filing, then all subsequent 8K filings are also now subject to the inline requirements once that first 10Q has been filed. So any 8Ks filed between June 15th and the date of that first inline 10Q filing will not require inline cover pages. For more information, you can refer to question 101.07 on CorpFin's interactive data compliance and disclosure interpretations. They have more information detailed on that on their page. And for foreign private issuers that file financial statements pursuant to the 9-month updating requirement that's in item 8.A.5 of Form 20F, these will also have to be tagged in inline if you are now phased into inline and the financial statements cover a period ending on or after the applicable phase-in date. As far as the cover page and some changes from the SEC, so for forms 10K, 20F, and 40F, there's a new field for the trading symbol of each class of registered securities. And there's also now a checkbox to indicate whether an internal control over financial reporting auditor attestation is included in the filing. For 10Qs and 8Ks, this same field, there's a field now for the title of each class of registered securities, each exchange on which they are registered, as well as the trading symbol. And we've included here a screenshot of what that looks like. I think many of you have already been complying with this requirement. The 10K was also updated to remove the delinquent section 16 check the box field. And there is now also a requirement to reference Exhibit 104 for cover page interactive data. Here is an example of a tagged cover page. If you have any issues related to the name of the filer that's included on the cover page, you can refer to the Edgar Filer Manual Rule 6.5.24. It's no longer, it is case insensitive. So if your company name is listed in all caps and you use title casing on the cover page, that is not an issue. The SEC does now accommodate punctuation such as periods, commas, or slashes in the names. It allows for abbreviations such as and versus the ampersand sign. And you can also drop the word the at the beginning of the name. So if it's registered as the Smith & Jones Corporation, it will match Smith & Jones Corporation. A little bit about the Exhibit 104. So there are two examples that are commonly used for 10Ks and 10Qs in the exhibit index. This first example details all of the data files that are submitted with the 10K and the 10Q. You will no longer submit 6 files, separate files. There will actually be 5 separate ones submitted. And if you note, it references on the instance document that it doesn't appear in the interactive data file because all of the tags are now embedded within the inline XBRL document. The SEC does actually extract that information and loads it to the page. In this second example, this is another example where not all of the files are listed separately, but it does reference the actual individual statements. Both, though, do reference Exhibit 104 related to the cover page. Take a note of the items there in red. This is actually updated language that needs to be added to the exhibit index. So the Large accelerated and accelerated filers should have already updated their exhibit indexes for this information, but for the smaller reporting companies and foreign private issuers, you will need to make this change for your first inline Form 10Q. Based on previous filings, I tend to see option 1 used more frequently, but both are acceptable. And as far as an example of an 8K filing, you'll see now that it also references the Exhibit 104. So that's just a highlight of information related to the actual filings and the cover page. And so now we wanted to start a discussion with Julie Marlowe, who Michelle introduced as the Assistant Director of the Office of Structured Disclosure, Division of Economics and Risk Analysis at the Securities and Exchange Commission. So I know Julie would like to give her usual disclaimer from the SEC, so I'm going to let her do that before we start in our discussion. Julie.
Thank you, Lisa, and thank you, Michelle, for the welcome. The Securities and Exchange Commission disclaims responsibility for any private publication or statement of any SEC employee or commissioner. The presentation today expresses my views and does not reflect those of the commission, commissioners, or other members of the staff. So I'm ready for the questions, Lisa.
Okay. So the first one is, does the SEC use XBRL data? Are investors or other data users consuming XBRL data?
Absolutely. As we have presented in several webinars and speeches, SEC staff use XBRL data to assess different disclosure scenarios across filers. We use it for rulemakings, risk assessment, compliance, economic analysis, and white papers. In terms of what others do, we do have evidence that other users, many stakeholders, are using XBRL data, including investors, academic researchers, financial regulators as well. So for example, we often receive questions from the academic researchers on our financial statements and notes data free on our website for their research. FASB has utilized XBRL data to assess impact of new accounting standards. We're also aware of a financial firm that used XBRL data for their analysis on Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. And if you attended FASB's In Focus webinar in April, you heard from a Morgan Stanley representative who discussed how that firm used XBRL data in its investment analysis. Further, other federal agencies, including the FDIC and the Bank of England, use XBRL data.
All right. So Julie, can you just tell us if XBRL data from smaller reporting companies is being used, or are consumers of this information focusing more on mid to large cap companies?
They are using XBRL data for many types of companies, including smaller reporting companies. We have received questions from the public about extracting smaller reporting companies' data, and other users have informed us of data quality issues they have noted in filings submitted by smaller reporting companies. Also, as the audience may have seen, our custom tag trend analysis for GAAP filers that we publish every year include smaller reporting companies.
All right. So can you just tell us or describe what are some of the advantages of inline XBRL compared to the conventional XBRL from the SEC's perspective?
Certainly. So inline XBRL allows filers to embed XBRL data directly into a hypertext markup language, the HTML document, so that filers need only prepare one inline XBRL document rather than generate an HTML document of their financial statement information and then submit XBRL data, the instance document, separately. For data users, inline XBRL provides an easier way to view, access, and explore the contextual information of the underlying data. For example, users can hover over values in the filing to find more information about the data, such as citations and hyperlinks to the relevant accounting guidance, narrative definitions for the values, reporting period information associated with the values. Inline XBRL also allows users to see which data is tagged with standard elements or custom elements. Further, you can easily sort the tag data by scaling, type of balance, such as debit and credit, and so forth.
Okay, I know we have several more questions here, so we're going to move on to the next one. So how many smaller reporting companies or foreign private issuers early adopted Inline XBRL?
So between June 15th of last year and May 4th of this year, a little over 1,000 smaller reporting companies and a little over 1,000 non-accelerated filers have early adopted Inline XBRL. We also saw north of 90 foreign private issuers who have submitted their filings in Inline XBRL.
All right, so how were the first and second rollouts? So this has been going on since 2019. So the large accelerated filers now are coming up on their 2-year anniversary, and the accelerated filers are coming up on their 1-year anniversary of Inline. So how are these first rollouts, first and second rollouts of Inline XBRL and cover page tagging?
We provided detailed instructions on Inline XBRL and cover page tagging in the EDGAR Filer Manual. So section 5.2.5 for Inline XBRL, section 6.5.49 for cover page. And as with any new requirements, we have received some questions from filers and vendors on these topics and have addressed them through our public-facing inbox, Ask OSD. And the address is structureddata@sec.gov.
All right, so based on all of these inline filings, have you seen an uptick in the quality with Inline XBRL versus the traditional XBRL that was used prior to 2019?
So only large affiliate filers and accelerated filers have been required to file in Inline XBRL as of now. So while some smaller reporting companies and non-affiliate filers have chosen to comply early, the population is not yet sufficiently complete to check the quality of data with Inline XBRL. And as you mentioned earlier, all our filers are required to file in Inline XBRL beginning with fiscal periods ending on or after June 15th of this year.
Is there a change in how data is used now that it is in Inline XBRL?
Inline XBRL has allowed users to do benchmarking and time series trend analysis within the human readable document, and also to include a disclosure checklist. In our experience, Inline XBRL enhances the review process as we can quickly dissect the filing by checking which amounts are tagged with custom elements and by using various filters such as scaling. And speaking of scaling, we issued a data quality reminder on scaling errors, creating a discrepancy between the number of common shares outstanding on the filing cover page and on the balance sheet. So in certain cases, if the filer had a capital structure or other operational changes, the two amounts may vary. But in the ones that we reviewed, we didn't find any transactions like that. So using the scaling feature in Inline XBRL, we're able to quickly sort amounts in thousands, millions, and see which amounts may have scaling issues. Our internal analytical applications can also do benchmarking, time series trend analysis, and have other features as commercial vendors do.
Okay, well, I think now we have a few legal compliance questions that we wanted to cover here. So can you talk about cover page tagging and its application to all Form 8Ks?
Sure. So all Forms 8K apply to cover page tagging, not just the ones that contain financial statements, but all Forms 8K.
Is cover page tagging required for registration statements?
No, it is not.
Okay. Another one is now that we have foreign private issuers that will start complying with the inline rules, is it required for 6K filings?
No, it's not required.
All right, so I know I reviewed some examples earlier, but can you clarify the difference between Exhibit 101 and 104 for everyone on the call today, and where and how they're used?
Yes, registrants subject to Inline XBRL requirements should identify any interactive data file required under Rule 405 of Reg ST as Exhibit 101 in the exhibit index, and any cover page interactive data file required under Rule 406 of Reg ST as Exhibit 104 in the index. Additionally, when an interactive data file is submitted using Inline XBRL, Instruction 1 to paragraph B101I and II of Reg SK item 601 requires that the exhibit index includes the word inline within the title description for any such exhibit. Further, as described in Volume 2 of Edgar Filer Manual, Section 6.3.2, filers should satisfy the requirement to submit a cover page interactive data file using an Inline XBRL document set with EX101 star attachments rather than EX101 INS, the instance document. Accordingly, in the case of a cover page interactive data file identified as Exhibit 101 in the index, the exhibit index should cross-reference to the interactive data file submitted under EX101.
Okay, and I know we covered a lot. I had an example earlier where I highlighted in red, at least that reference to inline that you just mentioned. So our smaller reporting companies need to make sure that they do update their previous language from prior year 10Qs with that new wording. So what happens?
That was a great example. Sorry, go ahead.
What happens if an issuer already submitted an inline XBRL filing that did not reference Exhibit 104?
So the exhibit index would be non-compliant, which could result in a staff comment. Please note that under certain situations, on Exhibit 104 is not required to be identified in a Form 8K, and audience can get more information on this in CORFIN's Interactive Data Compliance and Disclosure Interpretation, Section 101.04.
Okay, so what happens if a company mistakenly files an 8K without the cover page tagging and then discovers it is within the compliance period?
Failure to comply with XBRL and Inline XBRL requirements of Rule 405 of Reg ST can render the issuer not current in its filing obligations for purposes of determining an issuer's ability to use Form S3. It can also make Rule 144 unavailable to resellers of the issuer's securities in certain cases. However, the releases on Inline XBRL and the FACTS Act do not appear to address the consequences of failing to tag cover page data. So it would likely depend on whether omitting the information rises to the level of making the filing materially deficient, meaning that it is like it was not filed at all. In addition, missing cover page tagging may elicit staff comment.
So I guess word to the wise is make sure your cover page has inline tagging. That's the easiest and safest thing to do.
That's right. You won't hear it from us.
Okay, so amendments. So on to amendments. So if an original filing was submitted prior to the company's compliance date, so they filed a 10K, so smaller reporting company filed their 2020 10K, and now they need to submit an amendment and cover page tagging is now required. Does the cover page of that amendment need to be tagged with the inline XBRL? Julie, are you there?
Oh, sorry about that. I didn't know I was muted.
Okay,
so the answer
sorry.
No, the answer is yes. Rule 406 of Reg ST discusses more on that. But once an issuer is subject to Inline XBRL, all forms 10K, 10Q, 8K, 20F, and 40F must include cover page tagging. The rule does not distinguish between initial and amended filing.
Okay, thank you. Another question. So if an original filing was subject to inline XBRL, but now they're filing only certain portions of the filing, for example, they're restating their MD&A, but not the financials in XBRL, should the cover page of that amendment still be tagged?
Yes. Application of the rule does not depend on whether the statements are amended.
All right, so if a 10K was tagged when it was not subject to inline XBRL and then it's amended, does the amended 10K need to have all the financials tagged in inline XBRL rather than the conventional XBRL?
If the registrant is amending financial statements for a period ending prior to the inline XBRL phase-in date, the statements do not need to be tagged in inline because the statements would not be for a period that ends on or after the phase-in period. If the company jumped the phase-in groups, the answer may be different, and the issuer should contact Division of Corporation Finance's Office of Chief Counsel.
Okay. So some additional questions, not necessarily on the cover page, or this now is related more to the cover page, but for filers that have more than one 12B or 12G security, what's the proper way to tag both of them?
So for each distinct security, the conditions apply to facts within a separate context, having a distinct members of dimensions, such as statement, class of stock access, or classes of share capital access in a standard namespace. We recommend the filers to review Edgar Filer Manual, section 6.5.46 for more information.
Another one on that cover page. So for filers with multiple states of jurisdiction, what's the proper way to tag one or more states? So
for a conglomerate entity where you have 4 or 5 members of a subsidiary's access, each with separate reporting requirements and its own file number in a filing, filers can use the DEI tag, legal entity access. Same with dual registrant. For other cases, what it shows on the filer's landing page, since that would have had to been set when the company was first registered, that would work. If the filers have any questions and that are kind of unique situation, they can email us with their questions and examples at structureddata@sec.gov.
All right, so what happens now if the SEC validate name doesn't always match the name that the company puts on their cover page? What's the best way to handle this? Should they use hidden tags? Should they change how they represent the name on their filing? What happens if they get a warning message because they have a hidden tag, if they choose to use that option? Is this something that our filers should be concerned about?
So Lisa,
I know I provided,
I think you...
Yeah,
yep.
I was going to say I provided some examples earlier of this, but I'll let you speak to the hidden tags and these other items here.
No worries, and the examples you presented were very helpful. So for non-inline XBRL instances, the conform name must be a case-insensitive prefix of the fact. So for example, conform name Smith would match the fact text Smith, John. For inline XBRL file, certain differences are ignored. So differences in white space, punctuation, hyphen characters, or single character words such as A.B.Smith will match Smith AD. There are more examples on this in section 6.5.24 in Edgar. And if you have other discrepancies that do not fall into this, please email us at structureddata@sec.gov. At the end of the day, it's up to the filer to change the name in the system of record at filermanagement.edgarfiling.sec.gov or change the XBRL cover page tags to match.
So it sounds like filers have a couple of options, but they need to decide, and that's probably something that they need to look at before they have to submit their first 10Q in inline XBRL.
That's right. And to address your question about the hidden tag, so there are validation warnings the filers may get on the use of hidden tags, and the filers can get a list of those warnings on hidden facts. For example, if there are hidden facts that are not referenced, you'll get a warning, and you can look at those warnings on, if you just look up OSD_Edgar validation warnings. While Edgar accepts filings that received warning messages, filers should review the warning messages and address the issues.
Okay, so now that the Edgar system is alerting filers to data quality errors from the DQC, are there any consequences to those issues if they're not resolved or fixed by the issuer before they actually submit it to the SEC?
So the filers will receive a validation warning for the errors, and filers are responsible for the content and quality of their submissions. And as the audience may know, XBRL US Data Quality Committee now provides a link where the public can check if a filing has DQC errors.
So I think a common one, or one that might be seen a lot, is negative values. I know the SEC has talked about negative values since 2010, and so that was one of the first rules that was implemented. But if there are values that should not be negative, those will get flagged and you will see that warning message whenever you test file your document. So I think, Julie, thank you so much for all of, there were a lot of questions today, and we really do appreciate your time and all of your experience and expertise sharing that here with the group. I think I'm going to turn this back now to Michelle for some CPE questions.
That's great. Thanks, Lisa. And Lisa and Julie, thanks so much. I know we had a lot of back and forth and a lot of discussion about the questions and about how best to address them to make sure that we brought some really useful information to, excuse me, to our audience today. So thank you again for all your work on this. I'm going to go ahead and launch our first poll. And again, this is for those of you getting CPE credit. And even if you didn't sign up for CPE, go ahead and respond to the question, because we can still give you CPE later on if you choose to. So the first question, the SEC rule for inline XBRL required large accelerated filers in the first wave of the rollout to begin submitting inline XBRL with their first fiscal period ending on or after which of the following dates? June 15th, 2018, June 15th, 2019, or June 15th, 2020. So this is large accelerated filers, and it's the first wave of the rollout. So we're gonna take about another 20 seconds here. Okay, I'm gonna close the poll in about 2 seconds here. Okay, and the correct response to that was June 15th, 2019. That was for the for the first wave of the rollout. So let's go to our second poll. Which list of the following best represents all the filing types that registrants are required to tag using inline XBRL for their? Is it number 1, forms 10K, 10Q, 8K, 20F, and 40F? Or list number 2, forms 10K, 10Q, 8K, 6K, 20F, and 40F? Or number 3, forms 10K, 20F, and 40F? Which of these lists is the best representation of all the filing types that registrants need to tag using inline XBRL for cover pages? So we'll take another 15 seconds or so here. Okay, we're going to close down the polls now. Thank you very much for responding. The correct answer was number 1. Actually, forms 10K, 10Q, 8K, 20F, and 40F. Answer number 2 included 6Ks, which are not included as part of the rollout at this stage. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Steve Horowitz, and Lisa's going to stop sharing her screen, and Steve is going to start sharing his. Steve Horowitz, again, is with NovaWorks, which is a longstanding XBRL US member, and he's going to take us into what's changed and what's not with the new requirements.
Great. Thank you for the introduction, Michelle. Yeah, so we're going to be talking about what's changed and what's not with Inline XBRL from a more technical perspective when talking about the instance document. So let's take a look at a short list of things that have changed. So we're talking about the instance document. That's the XML file you usually submit. It's no longer required to be submitted as a separate document. So the instance document is now going to be part of your HTML file. All of the same data is embedded inside of it. So you just have a single file, which is your HTML file. You can use that HTML file with the embedded instance information to extract a more traditional document from it. When you view these filings on the SEC after submitting them, you'll see an extracted instance document. So the SEC handles this for us automatically by pulling out the document if you want to use a older review tool to review it. The Inline XBRL viewer can be used with your instance document. So the instance file, once you have created your Inline XBRL, you can use any Inline XBRL compatible viewer, including a REL or whatever third-party viewer you want to use, and you can view your document as XBRL. This change has also eliminated the requirement for posting to the website, for hosting your filings on your website. It used to be required where you'd have to hold your 6 XBRL files for the link bases on your website. You'd have to have hosting for it. That's been eliminated. You don't have to do that anymore. So we do have some new features that are being added to the instance document. So the biggest one that's the most obvious to most users is when you view an inline file on the SEC's website. When you click on it, it will launch in the SEC's Inline XBRL viewer. This allows data tags to be viewed in the HTML file. You can just click on them to view the information. There are also a couple of new features that apply to the file itself to allow this to happen. One of the big ones is hidden tags. So this is the idea that you're tagging something in your HTML document that is not necessarily visible to the end user. There's a couple of different ways to handle that, but it does allow you to do things like if the company name is slightly different, you could tag it as a hidden fact and then have the actual company name be displayed however you want it to be. You can also do duplicate amounts. Now you could always do duplicate amounts with regular XBRL, but this allows you to take it a little bit further, and you can do things with rounded values to allow you to have like different values depending on where it's presented in the report. You could have a value in your balance sheet and further on your notes to financial statements, one being rounded and one not being rounded, which is advantageous to the user who wants to present that information. One other big new feature is transformations. A lot of the data in these reports is going to be required to be in a specific format. The US GAAP taxonomy, for example, for like current fiscal year end requires the date to be in a specific format. So transformations exist to take the date from a human readable format and transform it into the expected GAAP format for the XBRL. And this is handled mostly behind the scenes by whatever software you're using to generate your inline XBRL. The last big feature they've added to allow us to do inline XBRL would be continuations and exclusions. This allows us to stitch together text blocks from the document. So you can say, oh, this piece of text does not belong inside of my note, or you can have 2 separate pieces of text stitched together and say, oh, these belong into the same note. It allows you more control over where your document flow takes you around things that have to be tagged and where things do not have to be tagged. So let's look at some things that have not actually changed, because a lot is the same still. So you can still use the same company-specific extensions you've been using before. The extension elements don't change. You can keep using those. The requirements for using correct GAAP elements where required or where available is also still in place, so you can't just use all custom elements. Presentation link bases are still required. In fact, all link bases are still required. So just because you're doing it with Inline XBRL where you can't easily see the presentation relationships, you still have to have those. So things like parent-child relationships are still important to be defined. You still have to define label roles, that sort of thing. So going into labels, label requirements are the same. They have not changed. You still have to have captions that match the face financial statements. You still have your limited set of label roles. You have negated totals, negated labels, negated totals, period start, period end, your verbose, terse, standard labels. All that stuff is unchanged. And if you have company-specific extension elements, you should still use the normal style of naming those. So you still have to have definitions for them as well. Calculation relationships are still required. These are visible through the viewer, which is an improvement over the previous Inline XBRL viewer. So by using the SEC's Inline viewer, you can view what elements create a calculation. And those calculation requirements are unchanged. So let's look in more depth at some of these new features. First up, we have hidden tags. So I mentioned these pretty briefly, but hidden tags are used to include required information without actually displaying them. One of the most obvious uses of this is going to be on the cover page. So hidden tags should be used when the underlying source document does not include the exact information you want. So the company's CIK code, for example, is probably the best example of this, because nobody actually puts their CIK on their 10Q or their 10K. However, it is required to be in their document, so it has to be added as a hidden fact. Inline XBRL has a special section of the document called IX Hidden. It's at the top of every Inline XBRL document, and you can see all the hidden facts in there. This also allows you to do interesting things, like you could tag, for example, a picture of your company's logo as your company name, and say, oh, this is my logo, and the hidden fact value is my actual name. Instead of referencing a text in the document, you would reference the hidden text and just link it to the image. So when should filers avoid using hidden tags? Just because you can use these things does not mean you should. You do not want to intentionally hide data that should appear in the filing. So if it's required to be like on the cover page in the actual rules, it should still be on the cover page. If it's required to be anywhere, it should still be there. You should not include information that does not appear in the filing regularly either. You don't want to add extraneous hidden information that's not required. And a general rule of thumb is if you don't have to use hidden tags, you probably shouldn't use hidden tags. Most of the time, you tag the information normally. You tag a number as a number and be done with it. So you don't want to use hidden tags unless you actually have to use hidden tags. And let's take a quick look at how this would appear in the SEC's viewer. You can go to the data section of the SEC's toolbar at the top and click on additional items. And that will display hidden facts. So you can see in this report here, there's a hidden fact for the registry name, where it appears slightly differently because it does not have the punctuation. The SEC allows you to tag a company name exactly as it is now. It'll ignore the hidden fact, so you don't necessarily have to do this, but you could always have different spelling or alternative ways of presenting it. So just to reiterate that, this is something I've seen people do a lot. You always want to use hidden facts only when appropriate, or if you do not have a transformation available. So the transformation availability one is big. There are a lot of times where things have transformations available. Like if you have 5 years in your document, you want to tag that as a duration, you can use a duration fact generally. If you have something a little bit more abstract you want to tag where no actual transformation exists, like, I don't know, 5.6 years, but you don't want to have it represented as anything except a specific way, you could always try to use a hidden fact for that. When you're using hidden facts, it can also make the review process a little bit more difficult if you're not sure where to look for them. So make sure everyone involved with the tagging process understands what hidden facts are and how to review them. So we also have duplicate amounts. Duplicate amounts are generally just displaying the same information more than once. You might have 5.7 million on your notes financial statements, but in your actual balance sheet, you would present it as 570,000 in thousands. So these are the same number, just scaled differently. So you would generally use duplicate amounts like that whenever you have different precision levels. And you want to avoid using duplicate facts when you have inconsistent amounts. For example, if you have two amounts that would round differently, 5.7 would round to 6, so you can't say you have 5 million in your notes somewhere else, because that wouldn't round correctly. So you have to avoid using incorrect rounding and having inconsistent duplicate facts. If you have duplicate facts that are inconsistent like that, that will throw validation errors when you file the document to the SEC. So here's a quick look at what consistent duplicate amounts would look like. We can see here an example on the balance sheet. It clearly shows we have this number 43,725 in thousands, and we can see in a notes table is presented as 43.7. These are both the same number. One is just scaled to billions, one is scaled to millions, and they round to the same number when you scale it to 100 millions. So it's a consistent duplicate amount this way. If they rounded differently or they were not the same number, then it would not work, and you would receive an error. You would see an error when you file this. That duplicate amount error would look something like this, where it would say the instance document contained an element X that was used more than once in context Y, and it would ask you to correct that. So this is probably one of the most common errors I see. You just want to make sure that if you have duplicate facts, they're consistent duplicate facts. And if there's a good reason for them to be inconsistent, you might have to use a hidden fact or choose a different element to represent them, depending on your situation. So we also have continuations and exclusions. These are going to allow us to include or exclude specific pieces of text from non-numeric facts, such as your text blocks used in notes to financial statements. Filers should use continuations and exclusions when it's impractical to not use them. You don't want to use them all the time, but there are certain situations where you actually must use them. For example, continuations. I know of a couple of our clients use documents where they begin to tag a note to financial statement inside of one division tag, and they would end the text block in a separate division tag. You would have to use continuations to stitch those pieces together. Otherwise, you have imbalanced tags in your actual tag document. So using continuations allows you to do more complex formatting. Exclusions are kind of simpler than that. They allow you to just say this specific piece of text should not be used. And that's generally used with headers and footers, or if you have like spacer paragraphs between two paragraphs and you want to exclude this document from the actual XBRL document. So when should filers avoid using continuations and exclusions? You don't want to exclude data that should appear in your document. So if you have a financial table that should be included in your document, don't exclude that table. You also want to avoid using them excessively if you don't have to. If you have a reason to use them, that's fine, but there's no need to complicate the document if you don't actually need to use them. So here's an example of a document that can use continuations and exclusions. We have our segment reporting disclosure text block. I would not want to include my page break there. So I could specifically mark my page break as an excluded section of text, and you can see the highlighted area would wrap around that. So it would show only the text of the note when I click on it. I could use continuations to do the same thing, actually. I could just say this document, when the note ends here, it continues here. That would work the exact same way. So again, best practices for continuations and exclusions. You would use continuations when they're intended in the XBRL specification, same for exclusions. You don't want to use exclusions to intentionally hide or obscure facts that should be tagged. And you're going to want to be sure, just like with hidden facts, you have a process to review these, because it may look, your actual tagged data will look different than your HTML file. So you're still going to want to use something like the older style REL viewer, where you would view the interactive data. You would want to have additional viewers that you can use to view the full tagged information, because it will potentially look different than your HTML file, depending on how you've set your continuations and exclusions up. But that should do it for me. I'm going to turn it back over to Michelle now.
Steve, thanks so much. That was great. Really comprehensive, and gave a lot of great information. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so that we can go on to CPE questions here. And just want to to mention that we have received a bunch of questions, and Julie, thank you for responding to a lot of those questions as they've come in. There may be a couple that we can take care openly. Excuse me, before going on to the CPE questions, one question we did get is, do OTC securities have to be tagged on the cover page? They are not registered. Lisa, I don't know if you want to take that one. Or Julie, or Steve, actually, any of you can respond to that one.
That might be a better one for Julie to answer.
Sorry, I was typing on an answer to another question. Which question are we answering?
Sorry, Julie, let me repeat the question. Do OTC securities have to be tagged on the cover page? They are not registered.
I've asked our policy office to answer this question because it's a legal compliance question on tagging.
Okay.
So Marlene, if I don't hear back before this ends, I will send the answers to Michelle and get this for you.
Okay, great. We'll get back to that person. Yeah, sorry, I should have realized it was more of a compliance question. So,
no worries.
Let's go ahead with our CPE questions. We have our third CPE poll question, which hopefully you should be able to see right now. Which of the following has changed in the XBRL instance document with Inline XBRL? Is it number one, files no longer need to submit the company's specific extension taxonomy? Or number two, label requirements have changed? Or number three, the SEC provided viewer allows XBRL tags in the instance document to be viewed in the HTML? Which of those three is the correct answer to which of the following has changed in the XBRL instance document with Inline? And we have about another 20 seconds here. Okay, we're going to be closing the poll on this one. Okay, and the correct answer to that is the SEC provided viewer allows XBRL tags in the instance document to be viewed in the HTML. That was the correct response to that one. Okay, we're now going to our last poll question. Which of the following best describes the purpose of hidden tags? Hidden tags are used when two separate text blocks overlap or when text spans multiple pages with a page break in between. Or is it number two, hidden tags are used to include required facts or elements in the XBRL data without displaying them in the filing? Or number three, hidden tags are used to remove page header or footer information when text spans multiple pages with a page break in between? Which is the correct answer to the purpose of hidden tags? We have about another 15 seconds here. Okay, I think we're going to close down the poll. And the correct answer, which most of you got, was hidden tags are used to include required facts or elements in the XBRL data without displaying them in the filing. Okay, so thank you for taking the poll questions. And I want to thank all of our speakers today. I think everybody did a phenomenal job, and hopefully it was very useful for all of our audience members. I want to remind you about the event taking place next week, same time, same day, May 26th at 2 o'clock Eastern. And this is session 2 of Inline XBRL for small reporting companies and foreign private issuers. We're going to take a slightly different focus this time. We're going to cover more XBRL fundamentals. This time we'll be focusing on transformations, dimensions, and EFM changes. And again, Steve Horowitz is going to lead us through that. And then the second part of the session is going to be a focus on how investors use XBRL financials for small reporting companies, for foreign private issuers, and for other types of companies. We'll be seeing some demonstrations on how XBRL financial data is used today by auditors, by other public companies, by investors, by pension funds, by mutual funds. And that session is going to be covered by Pranav Ghai. Pranav is co-founder and CEO of CalcBench, which is a data analytics application. And also by Evan Condren. Evan is CPA, Senior Product Manager at Certent, an insight software company. So we look forward to that conversation as well. So please join us next week, and I hope everybody enjoyed the session today. And we'll see you next week. Thank you very much.